The Vantage Institute for Applied Physics on Station Kerrigan had been rewriting the Coalition's understanding of the universe for 210 years. It was not a university. It did not teach. It selected. It accepted one new theoretical researcher every 3 years. Not one per species, not one per system, one total, across every sapient species in the Coalition. In 2 centuries of operation, 412 applicants had been formally reviewed. 19 had been accepted. Of those 19, 6 now held permanent seats on the Coalition Physics Board. 3 had containment frameworks named after them. 1 had a moon named after her. The Institute did not publish its acceptance rate. It had calculated decades earlier that publishing the true number discouraged qualified applicants more than it discouraged unqualified ones, and the Institute cared only about the former. Its review process took, on average, 14 months. Every application was read by no fewer than 5 board members, cross-checked against 3 independent verification bodies, and defended in a closed hearing before a seat was ever offered. The Institute did not make mistakes. It could not afford to. A single flawed containment paper, published under its name, had once destabilized an entire orbital shipyard 4 systems away. The Institute's caution was not bureaucracy. It was scar tissue. In 210 years, 1 human had ever applied. That application had been sitting in review for 4 months, longer than any application in the Institute's recorded history, not because it was incomplete, but because the review board could not agree on whether the incident report attached to it was real. Elias Marrow was 34 years old, born on a research outpost at the far edge of human space, with a listed population of 41, and no official name on Coalition star charts. He had no formal doctoral advisor. He had no institutional co-authors. His entire publication history consisted of 3 papers, all self-submitted, all rejected by 3 separate journals for reasons that, in retrospect, none of those journals could clearly articulate. Director Asada Ven, who chaired the Institute's admissions board, had read Marrow's file 6 times before the board hearing. The first time, she assumed a transcription error. The file stated that 11 months earlier, alone, using containment equipment 2 full generations out of certification, Marrow had stabilized a spacetime fracture inside the outpost's research wing. A fracture that, by every existing model the Institute possessed, should have consumed the wing, the outpost, and roughly 40 kilometers of surrounding rock. The verification request had gone out to 3 independent physics labs, none of which knew about the other 2 requests. All 3 confirmed the same thing, independently within 6 weeks of each other, not the theory behind it. The event itself, the fracture had existed. Sensor logs from an unrelated Coalition patrol vessel 40 light minutes away had recorded the gravitational signature spiking, and then, 4 minutes and 12 seconds later, flattening to baseline. The fracture had closed. Marrow had done it with no support staff, no backup containment system, and no solution that appeared anywhere in published Coalition physics. Marrow had not mentioned any of this in his personal statement. His personal statement was 4 sentences long and described his research interests as boundary conditions and what happens at them. He arrived at Station Kerrigan 2 weeks before the term began. Badge unclaimed for the first 3 days because he hadn't gone to collect it. Quarters unremarkable, equipment unpacked without assistance and without announcement. He asked the facilities office for a wider workbench and nothing else. The challenge came during the second colloquium of the term, in the shared theory hall where incoming researchers presented informally before their first formal review. A tradition the Institute maintained specifically, so the community could take the measure of new arrivals before anything official was on record. Researcher Venkat Salu, an Idranari theoretician in his 3rd term, ranked first in the Institute's internal citation index for 6 consecutive quarters, introduced the human question the way that certain researchers introduce questions in rooms they consider theirs. which is to say, with the timing and tone of someone who has prepared it, rehearsed the phrasing, and waited for the hall to be full enough that the answer, whatever it was, would matter to everyone in it. "We've all read the incident report," Quetzalcoatl said, not looking up from his own notes, which was itself a kind of performance. "I think it would be useful for the human to walk us through it properly. Unless we're meant to simply accept it, the way outposts tend to accept most things on faith and without instruments." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the hall. Several researchers smiled, the particular category of smile that appears in rooms where a hierarchy is being gently, almost affectionately reinforced. Not cruelty, certainty. The comfortable confidence of people who believed the current order of things was correct and was about to be confirmed again, in public, at no cost to themselves. Director Venn, seated at the head of the hall, said nothing. She had pulled the full sensor logs from the outpost incident during Merrow's second week in residency. Not because she doubted the file, but because she had already decided how this exact moment would go, and she wanted the evidence ready when the room asked for it on its own. She had been an instructor for 30 years. She knew what a trap sounded like when it was still being built. Merrow, seated near the back with a training spear from his outpost's practical defense curriculum leaning against his chair, an object several researchers had already quietly asked him about, and one he had not yet explained, looked up from his notes with the mild attention of someone who had genuinely been asked a question, rather than tested by one. "That's a fair question," Merrow said, in the tone of someone who found it fair because he did. "Do you want the theoretical explanation, or do you want to know what actually happened in the room?" Quetzalcoatl blinked, caught slightly off balance by the lack of defensiveness. "Aren't those the same thing?" "No," Merrow said. He set down the stylus he had been holding. "The theoretical explanation is 11 pages long, and it's still incomplete. I haven't finished the boundary condition proof. What happened in the room is one sentence." The hall waited. Even Quetzalcoatl, despite himself, waited. The fracture was already expanding faster than any standard containment field could close it, so I didn't try to close it. I matched its expansion rate instead, and then subtracted mine from it. Merrow picked the stylus back up as though the sentence had cost him nothing at all. The room was silent. Director Venn stood. "Since the room has asked," she said, "I have the footage, all of it." The footage was not dramatic in the way Institute training simulations were dramatic. No warning klaxons, no dramatic lighting, no narrative framing designed to make a point. It was flat security camera footage, gray and time-stamped, unremarkable in every way except for what it showed. The first clip showed the fracture at initial detection, a hairline distortion along the observation deck's far wall, already wide enough to visibly bend the light passing near it. Standard coalition protocol, cited in 6 different first-year containment textbooks, called for immediate evacuation and remote deployment of an automated field generator. Merrow was visible in the frame walking toward the fracture instead of away from it, already adjusting a handheld unit at his hip. By the second clip, 90 seconds later, the fracture had tripled in width, and the outpost's overhead lighting had begun to strobe from the gravitational distortion. Merrow was recalibrating the same handheld unit, a device several researchers in the hall recognized and had personally cited in prior papers as explicitly unsuited for this class of event. By the third clip, the fracture's edge had begun consuming a support strut, bending it visibly inward before the metal simply stopped resisting and folded. Merrow's voice was audible on the recording now, narrating a running calculation to no one, since no one else was in the room with him. By the fourth clip, the fracture had stopped growing entirely. Not closed, matched. Held at a fixed boundary while Merrow continued working, the handheld unit's readout climbing through numbers that, according to its own manufacturer's documentation, it was not built to display. By the fifth clip, the boundary had begun to visibly shrink, a fraction of a centimeter at a time. the strain in Marrow's voice on the audio log the only indication that anything about this was difficult. By the sixth and final clip, the fracture was gone. The wall behind it was scorched but structurally sound. The entire event, beginning to end, had taken 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the exact figure from the unrelated patrol vessel's gravitational log, confirmed independently, months before Marrow had ever applied to the Institute. Quetzalcoatl was not smiling. He was watching with the expression of someone performing a calculation that was going to take considerably longer than the remainder of the colloquium to finish. "The math you used," he said slowly, the earlier rehearsed tone entirely gone from his voice, "matching expansion rate instead of forcing containment, that framework doesn't exist. I would have seen it. I read everything published in this field." "It's not published," Marrow said. "I wrote it during the 4 minutes." The silence that followed was different from the first silence. The first had been surprise. This one carried the weight of an entire hall quietly recalculating exactly who it had been smiling at 15 minutes earlier. Director Venn let the second silence hold for a long moment before she spoke again. "The Institute has spent 4 months," she said, "deciding whether this footage was authentic. It has spent considerably less time asking what it means that it is." Quetzalcoatl stopped at the door on his way out, his data slate still open to the 6th clip. "The framework doesn't have a name yet," he said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "That's going to be a problem for the citation index." He left without waiting for a response, which was, in its own quiet way, an answer of its own. Marrow gathered his notes and reached for the training spear leaning against his chair, the same one several researchers had asked about earlier and never gotten an explanation for, along with a small, fused shard of lattice glass he kept in his coat pocket. It was a fragment of the observation deck wall, cooled and hardened at the exact boundary where the fracture had stopped, and he had carried it since the day of the incident, without ceremony, the way some people carry a coin. Director Venn walked with him toward the corridor. "You understand what you did today," she said. "It was not a question." "I answered a question," Marrow said. "You ended a debate that's been running in this institute since before either of us was born," Venn said, "about whether containment theory needs to be rebuilt from its foundations, or simply patched at the edges every time it fails. You didn't argue for a side. You walked into a room and did the thing the losing side has spent 30 years insisting was impossible." Marrow didn't respond to this directly. He was already thinking about the 11 pages that were still incomplete, and about a boundary condition proof he wanted to finish before dinner. That evening, Director Venn opened his residency file, the same file she had read 6 times before ever meeting him, and added a note to the top of it, the kind of note that would be read by every admissions board for the next 200 years.